What if everything you've ever believed was a lie, carefully rehearsed for you since birth? What if the story of justice, freedom, and peace was written by those who profit from war, silence, and occupation? What if the oppressed weren't voiceless, but their voices were buried beneath your comfort? And what if right now, as you're watching this, prophecy is not only unfolding, but calling your name? This is not just a speech. This is a line in time, a mirror to history, a slap to sleepwalkers. The fall you were never meant to see is happening in plain sight. And the truth they've hidden for 75 years is finally leaking through cracks no media can seal. But here's the question. Will you blink and scroll, or will you finally see? Not with your eyes, but with your soul. This isn't about headlines anymore. It's about heaven watching who stands and who stays silent. The global shift in public opinion is inevitable. For decades, the narrative surrounding Israel and Palestine has been tightly controlled by mainstream media, political alliances, and carefully curated headlines. The world was handed a version of the story where one side was always seen as the victim and the other as the aggressor. But in recent years, that illusion has begun to crack. What used to be hidden behind polished news segments and diplomatic language is now exposed through raw footage, unfiltered voices, and grassroots activism. From the streets of London to the campuses of America, from Johannesburg to Jakarta, millions are marching, questioning, and speaking out. The silence that once suffocated the oppressed is being shattered by voices that will no longer be ignored. Social media has become the modern-day battlefield for truth. With every scroll, another veil is lifted. What governments won't say, the people are showing. What headlines won't print, survivors are recording. The youth, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, are no longer bound by inherited bias. They see the suffering, they hear the cries, and they're choosing to stand on the side of humanity, not propaganda. This shift isn't just emotional, it's intellectual. People are researching history, studying borders, analyzing policies, and exposing hypocrisy. They're asking questions the media hoped they'd never ask. They're no longer satisfied with one-sided scripts. This awakening isn't driven by hatred, it's driven by truth. And truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. You can no longer bomb a hospital and call it defense without global outrage. You can no longer justify apartheid and expect applause. The ground is shaking not because of war, but because of awareness. This is why protests are multiplying, why censorship is intensifying, and why voices of truth are being silenced. Because they're working. And the most powerful sign of this shift, it's not in policy, it's not in headlines, it's in the fear of those who once controlled the story. They sense it. The world is changing, the blindfolds are falling, and no matter how powerful the oppressor may appear, when the world starts to see the oppressed as human again, the tide becomes unstoppable. That's not politics. That's divine timing. That's history repeating itself, and it's only just beginning. The rise of the Ummah's consciousness is one of the most significant shifts of our time. For years, the Muslim world has been fractured by borders, silenced by fear, distracted by survival, and distanced by media. Nations were divided, hearts were desensitized, and identities were diluted. But something has changed. What was once quiet is now roaring. From the corners of the West to the heart of the East, Muslims are beginning to wake up, not just politically, but spirit. This awakening isn't driven by scholars or politicians. It's driven by the pain of the oppressed and the cries that can no longer be ignored. The images of suffering, the echoes of injustice, and the weight of silence have become too loud for the soul to bear. This isn't a movement of rebellion, it's a movement of return. Return to unity, return to purpose, and return to the understanding that the Ummah was never meant to be passive. We weren't created to simply witness history. We were created to shape it. And this awakening proves that young Muslims who once questioned their place in the world are now embracing their identity with pride and responsibility. They're speaking in classrooms, on platforms, in protests, and in prayer. They're calling out injustice not just in the name of politics, but in the name of truth. And that truth is rooted in something much deeper than flags or factions. It's rooted in faith. This rise is not loud in every corner. In some places it's quiet, a personal conviction, a private dua, a choice to stand firm when it's easier to stay silent. But it is rising in homes, in hearts, in hashtags, in hands raised to the sky. This is not about hate. It's about healing. It's about realizing that the pain of one child in Gaza is the pain of a brother in Turkey, a sister in the UK, a student in Malaysia. The bloodline of the Ummah is not culture, it's not race, it's faith. And that faith is reconnecting in ways that frighten those who benefit from our division. The enemies of truth fear a united Ummah not because of weapons or wealth, but because of what we become when we remember who we are. That memory is returning. That spirit is rising. And no matter how hard they try to suppress it, light always finds its way through cracks. Israel's moral narrative is collapsing. For decades, it stood as the world's most defended illusion, a state portrayed as the eternal victim, surrounded by enemies, constantly under threat, and fighting only in self-defense. This narrative was reinforced by powerful allies, repeated by mainstream media, and absorbed by generations who never questioned the storyline. But the mask is slipping. With every bomb that falls on civilians, with every image of a demolished school, with every voice silenced and life lost under occupation, the moral credibility of this narrative erodes. People across the globe are no longer accepting the excuses. The world is beginning to ask the questions it was once afraid to speak aloud. How long can a state call itself a victim while operating one of the most advanced military machines against a population with no army, no air force, no escape? What once sounded like defense now looks like domination. The script is falling apart because the evidence isn't coming from opinion pieces anymore. It's coming from the ground, from children live streaming their last moments, from doctors in makeshift hospitals recording the screams between surgeries, from journalists who were silenced with bombs because their cameras told too much truth. The carefully crafted image is cracking because real human suffering can no longer be hidden behind slogans like security and retaliation. Every time an unarmed civilian is killed, every time an aid convoy is blocked, every time collective punishment is justified, the world sees it for what it is, and more people refuse to look away. Israel's claim to moral high ground is no longer unchallenged. Even voices within the Jewish community, scholars, historians, and former allies are speaking out, refusing to be complicit in a story that no longer holds. This collapse isn't happening overnight, but it is happening. Slowly, the legitimacy that was once unquestioned is becoming conditional. And once legitimacy becomes conditional, power becomes unstable. That's what we're witnessing. A shift, not just in perception, but in permission. The world that once cheered blindly is now hesitating. And that hesitation is powerful. When a system's morality fails to convince, its structure starts to tremble. That's the painful truth unraveling today. The illusion of moral superiority is dying, not through war, but through truth. And truth, once revealed, does not return to darkness. Zionism is losing its mask in the digital age. For much of modern history, Zionism was presented as a liberation movement, a return of a people to their homeland after centuries of exile and persecution. It was framed in romantic tones, backed by Hollywood, echoed in textbooks, and protected by political alliances that discouraged questioning. But the internet changed everything. What was once hidden behind headlines and one-sided documentaries is now exposed in real time by the very people living under its consequences. For decades, Palestinian suffering was a footnote. Now it's the headline. And that shift is not accidental. It's a result of voices that refuse to be silenced, stories that refuse to die, and platforms that can no longer be completely controlled. Zionism, when stripped of its public relations gloss, is no longer seen by the masses as a quest for peace. It is increasingly seen as a project of displacement, apartheid, and unchecked militarism. This transformation in perception is not being led by governments or media empires. It's being led by ordinary people with phones, cameras, and the courage to tell the truth. Digital platforms have become battlegrounds of narratives, and for the first time, the oppressed have a microphone. The images of demolished homes, the videos of crying children under rubble, the testimonies of mothers clutching the lifeless bodies of their sons, they speak louder than decades of diplomatic spin. The sanitized language of security and self-defense no longer survives when raw footage of reality is just one click away. This generation isn't just consuming news, they're investigating it. They're dissecting history, asking hard questions, challenging their education, and calling out double standards. Zionism's mass depended on the world not knowing the full story. That's why journalists are targeted, why voices are silenced, and why censorship is rising. Because the truth is dangerous to any ideology that cannot stand unfiltered. The more truth comes out, the more the mask slips. And what's revealed is not a peaceful vision, but a political machine that has confused criticism with hatred and oppression with survival. The digital age doesn't allow lies to breathe for long. Once a narrative collapses online, it collapses everywhere. Zionism is not just being questioned, it's being redefined in the minds of millions. And once that redefinition settles, the world will no longer treat it as untouchable. The illusion is breaking, not because it was attacked, but because it couldn't withstand exposure. The fall may not be explosive, it may be internal. When people imagine the collapse of a powerful state or ideology, they often picture a sudden war, an external enemy, or a dramatic overthrow. But history tells a different story. Some of the greatest empires didn't fall because of outside attacks. They fell from within, slowly, silently, and steadily. The cracks began in their morality, their unity, their sense of purpose. And what we see today in Israel mirrors that pattern. While military power remains strong and international allies still exist, the foundations are showing signs of deep erosion. There is growing unrest within its own population. Protests are rising, not just from the occupied, but from within. Young voices are speaking out. Former soldiers are questioning orders. Jewish citizens are calling out injustice. The image of unity is fracturing. Internal division is a warning sign in every empire that is nearing decline. When a nation begins to question its own reflection, when its people start to feel the weight of their silence, when its moral compass becomes blurry, collapse begins. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. Add to that international isolation, more countries are starting to hesitate. Global organizations are raising their voices. Economic relationships are being questioned. Cultural boycotts are gaining momentum. And once a nation starts to lose its moral allies, it begins to stand alone, not in strength, but in fear. The greatest danger is not the resistance outside, but the confusion inside. A system that must justify its actions every day is already struggling to survive. A power that needs to censor the truth is already afraid of it. And a government that silences dissent within its own ranks is no longer strong. It's unstable. The signs are not in explosions. They're in conversations, in shifting votes, in quiet hesitations from former allies, in the emotional exhaustion of a generation that no longer believes the narrative it was raised on. The world is watching the visible war, But the invisible unraveling is more dangerous, because once a structure begins to rot from the inside, no amount of steel can hold it together. The fall may not be loud, but it will be real. And history will record that it wasn't taken down, it fell apart. Muslims must wake up to their role in the prophetic timeline. What's unfolding before our eyes is not just politics, war, or conflict. It is a moment written in divine wisdom long before the headlines ever existed. The pain we see, the injustice we witness, the cries we hear from the oppressed, these are not disconnected tragedies. They are signs that the world is shifting, that truth is surfacing, that falsehood is being exposed. And in this divine script, the Ummah is not a passive audience. It was never meant to be a spectator to history. It was meant to be the conscience of humanity, the backbone of justice, the mirror of divine mercy, in a world lost in arrogance. For too long, Muslims have been fragmented by politics, by nationalism, by fear, by distractions. We forgot that when one part of the body feels pain, the whole body is supposed to respond. We forgot that we are not defined by borders or flags, but by the testimony that unites us across oceans and generations. And now, the world is changing fast. Every day, another layer of illusion is being peeled back. Every day, the veil of propaganda grows thinner. Every day, the world is looking not just at what's happening, but at who will respond with integrity, with clarity, with courage. This is not a call to chaos, it's a call to consciousness. Because the signs are not coming, they're already here, in the faces of the children under rubble, in the prayers whispered in occupied streets, in the courage of truth tellers who know they may not live to see justice. These are not random events. They are signals that the story is reaching a turning point. And in that turning point, the Ummah must ask itself, will we remain asleep, or will we reclaim the responsibility we were born with? The responsibility to stand for the oppressed, to speak truth even when it cost us comfort, to prepare our hearts for what the world can no longer deny. That prophecy is not distant, it's unfolding. Muslims must not only witness the signs, but recognize their place within them. Because when injustice begins to fall, truth must rise. And that rise won't come from outside, it must begin from within. This is not a moment to fear, it's a moment to remember who we are. So when you see the signs, the protests rising, the lies collapsing, the unity forming, and the truth breaking through screens and silence, know that this is not coincidence. This is not just another chapter in history. This is the moment the world changes its course. This is the moment falsehood trembles under the weight of truth. You were not born to scroll past this. You were not placed in this time by accident. You are living in a divine timeline, one where silence is betrayal and awareness is a duty. The fall we speak of is not just military, political, or structural. It's moral. And every moral collapse is followed by a spiritual rise. This is your sign to rise, not with hate, but with truth, not with violence, but with vision. Because truth doesn't need to scream, it just needs to stand. To every heart that still feels the pain of the oppressed, to every soul who refused to turn away, may your awareness become your weapon, and your voice become your legacy. Stand firm, stay conscious, speak truth, even when the world tries to silence it. Good luck on your journey. Thank you for standing on the right side of history. This is Inspired Era, and your awakening has only just begun.